All right, Professor John Mbaku, thank you so much for joining us. I've been looking forward to having this conversation with you for a very long time. You are one of the co-authors of Governing the Nile Basin, the Search for a New Legal Regime. You co-authored this with the late Mwangi Kimenyi, and this book is dense. As you can see, there's a lot of notes in here because it's very well referenced. And I would
Thank
say
you.
you are one of the top experts in Africa on this issue. So thank you so much for making the time, first of all.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
My pleasure. So let's get right into it. I mean, we are in the middle of a war right now in Ethiopia. And something I noticed in this book is that there were several warnings that if new Nile agreements are not reached, the chances of war or violence between Ethiopia and Egypt is high. I can't help but think that is what's happening right now. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the thing is that when you look at the region, what you discover immediately is that water from the Nile River is very important for Egypt. If you look at the map of Egypt, you see that most of the people in Egypt live along the banks of the Nile and the Nile Delta. So Nile water has been the source of life for Egypt for thousands of years. And what has happened is that during those years, because of underdevelopment in Ethiopia and political instability and other problems, Ethiopia has not actually had an opportunity to tap into the waters of the Nile. So the Egyptians have been able to use that water without any interruption. Unfortunately for Egypt, beginning in 2011, the Ethiopians were in a position to seriously challenge that control of the Nile by the Egyptians. And so I think this is why the Egyptians are really scared, primarily not necessarily because they believe that a dam on the Nile will allow Ethiopia to prevent them from having access to water. But I think what is happening in Egypt is that the Egyptians, for the first time, face the possibility that someone other than them would control the waters of the Nile River. And I think this is the fear that Egyptians have. And that is why you can hear Egyptian leaders talking about going to war with Egypt over water. And that is where the threat is coming from.
Right, going to war with Ethiopia over water. Well, let's talk
Yes.
about the legal framework that does exist. So there's a 1929 agreement that was signed between Egypt and Great Britain. Egypt was a colony of Great Britain at the time that basically gave Egypt all the power in terms of how to use the water and veto power on any constructions around the water. Can you tell us what that agreement was?
Well, the agreement is referred to as, it was actually called exchange of letters between Great Britain, but we refer to it as the 1929 Anglo-Egyptian Treaty. Britain was signing the agreement on behalf of its colonies in Africa. We understand that to mean Tanzania, which was called Tanganyika at the time, Uganda, Kenya. And so, but in reality, Britain was signing the agreement because it wanted to develop Egyptian cotton to replace the cotton that it had been importing from the American South, and which it had lost as a result of the war, the Civil War in the U.S. So agriculture was very important to Britain, and that is one of the reasons why the British came up with the idea of the treaty in order to allow Egypt to monopolize the waters of the Nile so that it could continue to produce agricultural products that were exported to the United Kingdom. And so, yes, the 29 agreement allocated most of the waters of the Nile to Egypt and Sudan and gave Egypt veto power over the construction of any structures, not just on the Nile River, but also on the tributaries of the Nile River. And so that's what the agreement did. The other thing that the agreement did was it also got geologists to determine the average annual flow of water in the Nile, and that was estimated at about 84 billion cubic meters. The agreement calls it milliard, the French word for a billion. So of that 84 billion cubic meters, some of the waters were given to Egypt and some to Sudan, but some water was left and was never allocated.
You know what's really interesting, and it's something I marked in this book, and you just said it now, but I really want people to hear it again, is a lot of the 1929 agreement that was between essentially Egypt and Great Britain. It was because Great Britain and I guess other countries needed somewhere else to get their cheap, I should say, cotton from, because they were no longer able to get it from the South here in the United States due to the Civil War. I think that is something that is really not known by most people. I mean, don't you find that fascinating? Just that connection between what's happening on the African continent and what was happening here in the United States.
Well, the thing is that a lot of people who study the conflict on the Nile usually think that the conflict beginning in the 1929 was between uh, uh, Egypt and Ethiopia, when in reality the main issue had to do with the maximization of the interests of the European countries, and in this case, Great Britain. The British were not in the Nile to protect Egyptian interest or Sudanese interest. They were there to restructure the economies of those two countries, Egypt and Sudan, to provide opportunities for businesses to grow and export commodities to the United Kingdom. That was the primary purpose of that process. Uh, and anybody who thinks differently simply doesn't understand what the geopolitics of the situation were. And the second issue there has to do with the fact that even today in Africa, as I've said in several forums, whenever Europeans offer to resolve African problems, I always tell Africans to be careful, because European leaders are leaders of European countries. They are not simply uh, um, uh, humanitarians going around trying to help people. They are representatives of independent countries, and their objective is to maximize the objectives of the countries that they lead. If they do otherwise, they could be impeached. And so when they offer to solve African problems, it is very difficult, I mean, very important for Africans to understand that there is a motivation there that may not be in line with the problems that the African countries are having. And so when the US government under Mr. Trump, President Trump, offered to negotiate an agreement between Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia, I made a warning at the time that it would be foolhardy for these three countries to think that the US was doing so simply because it wanted those three countries to have peace. The US has its own interests, and that is why the final agreement was one that did not really show that the US was interested in providing an agreement that was mutually beneficial to the three countries. And that is one reason why Ethiopia refused to sign that agreement.
Right. And I think both the current Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and the late Prime Minister Meles Zenawi both appear to understand that. I want to start with talking about Zenawi first, who is considered to be the initial architect in a significant way as far as the dam goes. What did he go up against? I mean, there was a lot of issues about him not wanting to take loans from IMF because probably because of what you're saying right now, in terms of if too many interests are involved, that Ethiopia would not be able to do what it needs to do with the projects. Can you talk a little bit about what the late Prime Minister Meles Zenawi was up against, and how that has evolved to what current Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is facing now?
Well, the thing with Prime Minister Zenawi was that he wanted a type of development in Ethiopia that was going to be determined by Ethiopians themselves. He wanted the objectives of the dam to be part of a larger project for economic development in Ethiopia, and he wanted that issue to be determined and defined by Ethiopians. And his fear was that getting external actors engaged would allow those actors to literally hijack the process and define it in a way that might not end up, especially in the long run, might not end up benefiting Ethiopians. Zenawi was a nationalist and also an Africanist in a way, in that he wanted economic development in Ethiopia to become a regional process in which economic development in Ethiopia will also benefit not just Ethiopia, but other countries in the region and in Africa as a whole. And so his idea was to come up with a project that would provide for rural electrification in Ethiopia, but also expand that electricity to other parts of Africa, to countries like Somalia, Sudan, Kenya, Uganda, and so on and so on. So that was one of the reasons why he was a little skeptical about engaging external actors. And part of that engagement was going to involve grants from international organizations like the World Bank and other international actors like developed countries such as the US and the European Union. So
Right. And
I think this was the major reason why he was a little skeptical about foreign involvement in Ethiopian development processes.
right. And that makes sense. I mean, considering the original agreement that is causing so many problems of these Nile waters, which some people like to, in Ethiopia, like to call Abai, but as you have noted, as we've talked offline, you like to refer to it as the Blue Nile because that's the more internationally recognized name, and it's just better for the issue that there's something consistent in terms of the naming. But so the not wanting to take loans from the international institutions was something that Zenawi pushed forward. And then moving forward, it was really Ethiopians, right, with putting in $5 billion into this dam that made it possible, which again makes it possible for Ethiopians to have some ownership of this dam. What do you make about the fact, I believe in the book it said, or in one of your articles, rather, that it's historic that Ethiopians themselves funded such a large project?
Well, I am not really up to date on statistics about these kinds of projects in Africa, but I can say with some confidence that this is the first time in the continent that a project of this type has been funded completely by domestic domestic funds generated by the citizens themselves, without any assistance from international organizations such as the World Bank or the IMF and foreign countries. So Ethiopians can have the right to beat their chest and tell everybody that this is a project that we finance by ourselves. That is one of the reasons why, as divided as Ethiopians are at the moment, when it comes to the GERD, they are not divided because the project belongs to them. And I think it's a very worthwhile achievement. It's something that other African countries need to look at and understand that it is possible with political will and also salesmanship by politicians within the country, Africans can finance their own development instead of always looking abroad and waiting for some external actor to come to their help. And so I think this is one of the things that people are missing about the GERD, about this dam, is the fact that the Ethiopians were able, even with all the difficulties that they have, economic difficulties, political difficulties, infighting between ethno-linguistic groups within the country, the war between them and Eritrea, and droughts and some other problems that created a lot of difficulties for Ethiopians. They were still able to bring the dam to full completion, and I think it's an achievement that Africans should celebrate, and that we, in my opinion, I believe that Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia should get together and celebrate and not fight over this dam, because it is going to be a very important project for economic development, not just in Ethiopia, but also in the region.
Right. And with that said, it does beg the question, then why is there fighting if it's going to be beneficial for all three countries? I just want to sort of go through some of the frameworks that were in place, like the 1929 agreement was between Egypt and Great Britain, 1959 between Egypt and Sudan. And then in 1999, there was a cooperative framework agreement that was trying to reconcile what was missing from those previous agreements. Sudan and Egypt did not sign that. And then recently, former President Trump tried to have an agreement of filling the dam, because the dam project, the actual dam, was already completed, but he wanted to mediate an agreement about filling the dam. That didn't happen, you say, because Ethiopia said this is just a regurgitation of the previous agreements that didn't really have our own interest in mind. So with that layout, my question to you is, there's the majority of the water from the Nile River does come from Ethiopia. The Nile River runs through 11 countries. But what the book also says, and articles you've written that say, is whether Ethiopia has this dam or not, it doesn't actually affect the water that Egypt is able to get. Is that correct?
Well, the thing is that, as Ethiopians have made clear, is that the dam is an electric generation, is a dam to generate electricity. So once the dam is filled, there should not be any significant impact on water flowing into Sudan and Egypt. And so at the moment, the fight is over how long it will take to fill the dam. And that is why the Egyptians wanted an agreement, because the Ethiopians wanted to fill the dam in less than 7 years so that they could proceed with generation of electricity. But the Egyptians wanted the process prolonged for up to 20 years. And the Ethiopians said no. So that was one of the first problems regarding why they couldn't come to agreement.
So I want to explore that a little bit. Why? So Egypt wants it to be prolonged because then if it's filled and hydropower is possible, and then it could also create more agriculture and then compete with Egypt. I mean, why does Egypt need it to take longer?
Well, the idea is that geologists argue that if you take longer to fill the dam, then the damage to if there's any damage to the downstream countries, that is Sudan and Egypt, if there's any damage to the downstream countries, it will be minimized. So the longer it takes to fill the dam, the less likely there will be damage in terms of water flows to the downstream countries. But the shorter the period that is taken to fill the dam, the more there is the danger that you would interrupt water flows to the downstream countries. The Ethiopians have already started filling the dam. They started in 2020. So they usually fill the dam during the rainy season, which occurs during the months of July, June, July, August, and maybe a little part of September. And they filled the dam in 2020, and the rainy season was quite significant, so there wasn't very much damage or impact on water flows to the downstream countries. The same issue happened in 2021. They are now beginning the third filling. They should have started in July with the third filling. And it was expected, at least that's what the Ethiopians said, it was expected that that same filling would not have significant impact on the downstream countries. But the downstream countries, particularly Egypt, wanted an agreement for filling and management, 2 points: to fill the dam, and after the dam was filled, how to manage the dam. And the Ethiopians did not sign the agreement that was negotiated by the US. And part of the reason, and of course, there was also an attempt by the African Union to help the three countries come up with an agreement. They negotiated in Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, and that agreement did not work. It failed. And what many people need to understand was that part of the reason it failed was that the Egyptians and the Sudanese insisted that the baseline for negotiations, of any negotiation for filling the dam and managing the dam, the baseline had to be what the Egyptians referred to as their acquired rights, historically acquired rights. Those are the rights that were given to them by the 1929 agreement and then reinforced by the 1959 agreement. So if you look at the 1959 agreement, the introduction of the agreement, the preamble to the agreement specifically talks of Egypt's acquired rights and Sudan's acquired rights. And those acquired rights were defined in the 1959 agreement as 55.5 billion cubic meters of water to Egypt and 18.5 billion cubic meters of water to Sudan, and 10 billion left over for evaporation and seepage. And that completely exhausts the 84 billion cubic meters of water that represent the average annual flow of water in the Nile. So one of the reasons why the Ethiopians did not cooperate in that discussion was the fact that the Egyptians insisted that any negotiation has to allow those historically acquired rights to be the baseline. And so if you are Ethiopia, you will be asking yourself, if that is true, then what are we negotiating over? Because there is no water left over to negotiate, since that 1959 agreement essentially exhausts all the waters of the Nile. And so that's and there was another issue. And that issue was the fact that Egypt also demanded that after the Nile the GERD goes into full operation, Egypt should be allowed to have a monitoring station at the GERD in Ethiopia, so that they could take active part in determining how the GERD was managed. And Ethiopians basically said no. That would be giving up sovereignty to Egypt by allowing Egyptians to come into their country and determine policy regarding how they manage their natural resources. And so those are some of the reasons why the three countries were not able to come to an agreement, and also why the agreement designed by the US was initialed by Sudan and Egypt, but not by Ethiopia.
So I want to explore this idea of natural rights that Egypt was talking about, because it appears that their naturally acquired rights goes against nature in a sense. And this is what I mean by that. So that agreement gives Egypt and Sudan a certain amount of water, and then it leaves the rest for evaporation. So from what I understand, talking to some officials, some GERD officials, whether they use this water that is literally raining down into the country or not, and actually use it to fill a dam, this water is coming down. So it's either going to be wasted or it's going to be utilized, right?
Yes. what Egypt is saying is that under international law, Ethiopia cannot prevent the water from coming to Egypt, even though the water originates in Ethiopia. Because the Nile is a transboundary or an international water course. International law says that Ethiopia, which is an upstream country, cannot prevent Egypt from having access to that water. So what the Ethiopians are saying is, we in defending themselves, the Ethiopians are saying, we are not trying to prevent the water from coming to you. We just want you to understand that you have been using this water for thousands of years without interruption from us. Now it's time for us to use the water, but we are going to do it based on international law principles, and we are going to use it in a reasonable way and in an equitable way. That is one of the, if you look at the 2005 agreement that was signed between, there was a core principles that were signed between Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia in Khartoum by the heads of states of the three countries. In that particular agreement, it said that the three countries were going to use the water based on international law principles, and those principles were no harm to the downstream countries, or no significant harm to the downstream countries. In other words, Ethiopia would agree not to inflict any significant harm on the downstream countries, and each country would use the water in an equitable and reasonable way. Now, the Ethiopians are saying that when they build a dam and fill the dam, they would be able to use the water in an equitable and reasonable way. But what the Egyptians are saying is that any interruption in the 55.5 billion cubic meters that they are supposed to get based on the 1959 agreement is not reasonable and is not equitable. And so that's where you have the disagreement, because the Ethiopians say you can't expect us to provide more than 85% of the water going to the Nile and tell us we cannot use any of it. Because if we allow you to use the 55.5 billion that you are saying, then there will be none left for us to use. And so that's
will what's left over, based on the way Ethiopia is doing, it's handling the project now, will what's left over in terms of water going to Egypt, will that be equitable and sufficient for the country, or is that what it's worried about, that it will not be in a real way?
The thing is that because the dam is a hydroelectric dam, it is not designed to divert water. It's not an irrigation dam. So when the dam is completed and is fully filled, it will not be diverting any water, say, into agriculture. Ethiopians have not yet said anything about agriculture. This is an electric dam. So when it is completely filled, when water comes in, say, during the rainy season, after it is filled, the water will just overflow and go directly to Egypt. There may be some hydrological, technical issues involved in that, but in general, when the water comes, once the dam is filled, when the water comes into the dam, it will simply just go over and flow down to Egypt. So Ethiopians are saying the only issue we have now is about filling, how fast to fill it. Because if you fill it too fast, then you might have a problem with water going down, because the filling process is actually an interruption in the flow of the water, because you're basically going in and putting like a piece of wood and preventing all of the water from passing through. So that's what the dam is doing. The dam is catching some of the water. So what Ethiopians are saying is that once the dam is completely filled, after that, there should not be any interruption in the flow of water to Egypt. Now, there may be a problem if there's a drought. So what the Ethiopians were saying was, let's come up with a formula to manage drought, so that if there's a drought, Ethiopians will be required to release some water from the dam to mitigate the drought. And the agreement that the US Treasury and the World Bank put together under the Trump administration did talk about drought. But what the Ethiopian was saying was that that agreement left mitigation for droughts entirely in the hands of the Ethiopians, meaning that what the agreement basically was saying was that if there was a drought, Ethiopia should release enough water from the dam to allow Egypt to continue to receive its 55.5 billion cubic meters. So, but Ethiopians were saying, no, what should happen is that if there's a drought, all three countries should share in mitigating the drought. Ethiopia should not be the only one allowed to deal with the drought, but that all, in other words, one way to interpret that simply means that if there's a drought, then Egypt and Sudan may have to go without some. They may have to go without some water as part of the process, and then Ethiopia will be required to release some water, and so the three countries will share in the drought. So in the problem with the drought, or if there's a drought, or if there's a climate change, and so on and so on, the three countries should get together and figure out how to deal with it so that they all suffer if there's a drought, and they all benefit if there is a big rainy season.
You know what's interesting, what I think I hear you saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is for decades, Egypt has sort of been, handling this water on its own, and then bringing in Sudan to some extent. And now these three countries, along with Ethiopia, really are going to be married because of this project, right? And their fates are actually going to be intertwined in terms of water use. And so in a way, they either are going to learn how to work together, or as you as the book says, mentioned several times, this is going to be a source of continued conflict. Do you see Egypt, which has had pretty much all of the control of the water coming from the Nile River thus far, do you see Egypt letting up a little bit because out of just the necessity? And how much, I'm curious what you think about how much of the current conflict do you think is instigated or coming from Egypt, the current conflict in Ethiopia?
Well, I think that Egyptians do not really have that much of a choice but to reassess their position, primarily because the dam is already built. And in addition to that, the Sudanese are beginning to see benefits from the dam. The dam is, when it is fully operational, would allow Ethiopia to produce as much as 6,000 megawatts of electricity. That's a lot of electricity. Much more than Ethiopia can use. And so Ethiopia is planning to sell some of that electricity to neighboring countries. And Sudan would be one of those countries to benefit. So Sudan sees a very big benefit in terms of rural electrification in the country. Now, the dam can also allow for flood control, a problem that Sudan has been suffering from for many years. And so the dam would benefit Sudan in terms of flood control. In addition to that, sediment. Sudan has its own dams, and the good may actually improve efficiency of Sudanese dams. And so what we have seen in the past few years is that Sudan has become less rigid and is beginning to appreciate the position that they find themselves in with respect to Ethiopia. And so if that is true, then Egypt will have to readjust its position, because the position that they are holding now does not make sense if you look at it very critically, because you cannot expect a country like Ethiopia that provides over 85% of the water flowing to the Nile to be allowed not to use any of those waters. It simply doesn't make any sense. And so given the fact that the dam is completed, it is operational, I think that Ethiopia is now in a much better position to negotiate with Egypt. And if the Egyptians continue to be stubborn, they are going to find themselves in a very difficult position I'm not saying that the Ethiopians should cut off water flowing to Egypt. That would be a terrible thing for them to do, and that would be a cruel thing for them to do, primarily because we all know that it is a fact that Egypt depends on the Nile for more than 90% of its fresh water. And so no one, either Ethiopia or anyone else, or any one of the upstream countries, use that against Egypt. What I think the Egyptians need to do is understand, as you just said, that now the three countries are literally married, and they should start thinking of themselves not as independent countries when it comes, as sovereign countries when it comes to water. They should look at themselves as one huge landmass, so that the allocation of waters from the Nile should be approached from a regional perspective, as opposed to from the point of view of independent countries within the area. I've argued elsewhere that if they look at it that way, from a regional perspective, then what would happen is that if there's a drought in some part of Egypt, all three countries should look at that as a problem that they themselves should sit together and solve. Or if it's a drought in northern Ethiopia, then the three countries should sit together and look at it as a problem that they need to solve, as opposed to just having each country think of itself. Because the water, the Nile River belongs to all 11 countries, not just to any one country. And if they look at it that way, I think they would reduce the conflict that they have right now, and begin to approach the Nile in a much better way.
Is there precedent for that? Is there precedent for Egypt and Ethiopia working together this closely on anything, or would this be sort of the first time that they would have to recognize each other in this way?
Well, I think that there are precedents, not very strong ones, but yeah, there are precedents. I mean, these countries have cooperated, maybe not formally, but informally, on fighting terrorism, extremism. They've cooperated in trade and economic development. So I don't see why they cannot continue to do so. I mean, the thing is, one of the things we have to understand here is that many of the boundaries between these countries were established through colonialism. And if you go to that part of the world, you're going to discover that a lot of people don't even, especially people in the rural areas, don't recognize boundaries. If you look at the border between Ethiopia and Sudan, people go back and forth every day and have no idea what boundaries mean to them. And the same thing between Egypt and Sudan. So I think that the struggle between these countries has something to do with colonialism. And if they are, although Ethiopia was never really a colony, but if these countries understand what is really going on, they understand that this is a common problem. This is something that all of them face. And there is no reason for them to start running around the world trying to find external groups to solve the problem for them. That is what I've said before, that Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt should sit down and talk to each other and try to figure out how to solve this problem, as opposed to going to Washington or going to the European Union and so on, because the external actors have their own interests in the region. And whatever solution they come up with is a solution that may not necessarily benefit the three countries. It's a solution that will benefit them. Even China, which has become involved in the problem. No matter how you look at China, China is not that different from the US or the European Union when it comes to involvement in Africa. The Chinese are interested in maximizing their own objectives, just the same way that the Americans and the European Union are in maximizing their own interests. So the African countries should sit down and solve these problems by themselves. They should stop fighting each other and talk to each other. I mean, there are a lot of Ethiopians in Egypt, and there's a lot of Egyptian investment in Ethiopia. And so the foundation is there. The leaders, especially civil society leaders, just need to sit down and talk to each other. And I think if they do that, they should be able to find a solution that benefits Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia, and the other countries in the region.
So if they're not talking directly to each other, if there was to be a mediator, is there a mediator, whether it's an organization or an institution, maybe from the African continent, that you think would be able to mediate well, or is the best alternative them talking to each other?
I think that the best alternative is for them to talk to each other. If they are not able to do so and they need a mediator, the mediator should be an African mediator, not a mediator from outside the country. I don't have anything against mediators from outside the country, but the problem with mediators from outside the country is that those mediators are usually political leaders. And political leaders are beholden to their own people. If you are the president of the United States, or you are the Secretary of State of the United States, your function is to maximize American objectives. That's the only reason you are there. There's no other reason. You are not there to serve Ethiopia. You are not there to serve Egypt or Sudan. So your services to Egypt or Sudan are only to the extent that those services in some way help maximize the objectives, the foreign or the security objectives of the US. If they don't, then you shouldn't get involved, because if you do, you can get in trouble because you're not performing your job. So just by definition, an external actor like the US is not going to engage in a system that will allow that external actor to behave without any underlying interest.
And that's just that sounds logical. Please, yeah, continue.
Well, yeah, it's just the nature of politics. It's like the Trojan horse, where the guy comes in and he tells you, we are doing this for your own good, when in reality you have no idea what is in the horse. Here, take this horse, it's for your own benefit, and you have no idea what is in the horse. And so my argument all along is that Africans have been colonized for a very long time. They've been independent for quite a while. It is time for them to start solving their own problems. Because when you look around the world, I mean, you cannot imagine that there is a problem between two states in the US over some issue, and they go out of their way and invite an African country to come and resolve the problem for them. So why is it that every time two African countries have a conflict, they immediately go to Washington and start asking for help, or they go to Brussels and start asking for help? That doesn't make sense to me. I think that Africans need to start developing the capacities to be able to resolve the problems themselves. But there's a bigger issue here, and that is the fact that the Africans there in Ethiopia, in Egypt, in Sudan, they understand the problem more than the foreigner. No matter how hard you study the problem, you're not going to understand it better than the people who live the problem day to day. And that is one reason why it is important for Africans to look inwards and allow their own people to provide them with the information that they need, the resources that they need to resolve these problems. I mean, through all these arguments over the Nile, I've never had an opportunity in which these three countries actually engaged their citizens and asked them what they wanted to be done with this problem. They've always been, the politicians have always been the people to go forward and start making suggestions on how the issue should be resolved. I mean, especially when you realize that before these countries emerged, before there was a Sudan, before there was a modern Egypt, and so on and so on, people in that area had been living together peacefully and using the waters of the Nile without any problems.
I want to get some clarity on the timeline of the dam filling that that you mentioned. So Ethiopia wants to do it in 7 years. Egypt wants it done in 20 years. The dam is constructed without an agreement. It's being filled without an agreement. I believe it's in its third filling currently. Does that mean there's 4 more fillings, 4 more years, or could it be filled before the 7 year timeline that Ethiopia has set? What's going to happen with that?
Well, the thing is, it's very difficult to determine how, you see, because the filling, the the speed with which the Ethiopians will fill the dam is determined by the nature of the weather. You see, the previous 2 fillings went very well because the, the, there were heavy rains. We don't know what is going to happen in the future. And so if the rains continue the way they've done in the 2 previous fillings, it is possible that Ethiopia might be able to complete the filling before the 7 years are over, which is what the Ethiopians want to do. They want to do it in less than 7 years. But the Egyptians want them to extend it to maybe 20 years, and so on and so on. And of course, there is no agreement. So what is happening is that the Ethiopians are filling the dam according to their own timetable. And it is not likely that there will be an agreement because the Egyptians have refused to give up the idea that the rights that they acquired from the 1959 agreement should be used as a baseline. As long as they continue to make that argument that those rights be used as a baseline, I don't think Ethiopia would agree, because if Ethiopia agrees, it would invariably mean that Ethiopia is recognizing a treaty that was signed between Egypt and Sudan, and which Ethiopia was not a party to. And Ethiopians have said they are not going to accept that. And so that's where we are now. And so with respect to the timeline will be determined by the nature of the weather. If, say, the next few years we have droughts in Ethiopia, then the dam may not be filled as quickly as the Ethiopians thought it would. But if the rains continue, then it is possible for the Ethiopians to fill the dam in a much shorter period than they anticipated, maybe 7 years or less. But the Egyptians continue to insist that they should come up with an agreement. And of course, it is not just the timeline that is the reason why the Ethiopians don't want the agreement. As I mentioned earlier, there are other issues that the Egyptians want included in a filling agreement, what I refer to as a good treaty. There are other issues that the Ethiopians do not want to accept, and that is an Egyptian station at the dam, a diplomatic station at the dam for Egyptians to monitor. The Ethiopians don't want that to happen.
That to me doesn't seem like an unreasonable ask. What do you think?
Well, it depends. I mean, the thing is, Ethiopia is an independent country, and Ethiopia has told Egypt that Ethiopia does not have a monitoring station at the Aswan High Dam in Egypt. So why should Ethiopia allow Egypt to have a monitoring station at their own dam? And not only that, it's not a take from the point of view of Ethiopia. It's not a technical issue. It's an issue of sovereignty, because they believe that if the Egyptians are allowed to come to Ethiopia and begin to dictate policy on how Ethiopians manage their natural resources, then Ethiopia would have lost sovereignty over their own country. Now,
what do you think about, so if they were really to come to an agreement on how to that really works for everybody, what do you think about, there being Ethiopians in Egypt sort of being monitors and all the three countries. I mean, if you're going to work together to that degree, and if everyone has monitors from different countries in each country, would that be something that makes sense, or is this just something that Egypt is offering that really doesn't have any value?
Well, I really don't think that the Egyptians will allow a foreign country to come and monitor the Aswan High Dam. I, I mean, the Aswan High Dam has been around for many, many years, and that has never happened. I really doubt that they would allow that to happen. The second thing is, I don't really see what the benefit of such a monitoring station would be, uh, because this is a hydroelectric dam. Once it is filled, there would be issues, but you can be informed of those issues without having a monitoring station, because it's
That
not
would be why you sign a treaty, right? So that you can actually
right.
agree.
That's why you sign a treaty. So if that's why I suggested the good treaty, that they had come up with a good treaty, so that what the good treaty could do could require Ethiopia, for example, as it would at the Aswan High Dam, it could require Ethiopia to inform the other countries about water levels in the dam every so often. So Ethiopia would have to generate statistics, which are not very difficult to generate, especially given the technology that we have today. So Ethiopia could generate statistics that are released to the other countries regularly. And occasionally, researchers from the three countries could visit the dam for research purposes. They will not be coming there as diplomatic representatives. They'll be coming there as researchers, maybe economists, lawyers, engineers from Egypt, Sudan, or maybe Kenya, Uganda. They could visit the dam as researchers and generate data that could be used to study what is going on with the dam and so on and so on, just like we do with the Hoover Dam here in Nevada, on the border between Nevada and Arizona. Researchers from all over the world, they come over there and they get data and they study the dam. So it's not that difficult to find out what is happening to the dam without having a diplomatic station at the dam. We know a lot about the Aswan High Dam today, and yet many of the people who study the dam are not, they don't come from countries that have some kind of monitoring system at the dam. So I think that I can sympathize with what the Ethiopians are saying, is that establishing an Egyptian station in at the dam will not really change very much in terms of what the Egyptians are going to get from the kind of data that the Egyptians would have access to with respect to the dam. But it would interfere with Ethiopia's sovereignty, Ethiopia's territorial integrity, and I think that's what the Ethiopians are. It is not my argument. It is an argument given by the Ethiopians, and I understand that Egyptians can get information from the dam that will allow them to understand what is going on with the dam without
Without
having a
that
station,
sort of, right, a
without
monitoring
having a station
station.
uh,
So
uh,
So,
there.
Professor, how far do you think Egypt is going to go? I mean, the dam has been built without an agreement. It's in its third filling without an agreement. There's a current conflict right now, and there's a lot of talk about the fact that Egypt is fueling that conflict. Although I don't have hard evidence on that. How far do you think Egypt is willing to go before it actually sits down and tries to come up with an agreement that fits all three countries?
Well, the Egyptians have been good. The Egyptians have internationalized the conflict. They went to the UN Security Council. They didn't get any help from there. At least the UN Security Council basically punted the issue and told them to go back and meet. What the US Security Council basically said was, you guys go back, meet together, and try to come up with a mutually acceptable agreement. In other words, they were really going to, there wasn't anything they could do. And then they came to Washington. And Washington did come up with an agreement that favored Egypt, but the Ethiopians refused to sign the agreement. And at that time, President Trump threatened to withdraw foreign aid from Ethiopia, if Ethiopia did not sign the agreement. The Ethiopians did not sign the agreement. The Egyptians have threatened war. That would be totally foolish to try to go to war with Ethiopia. Several regimes in Egypt, going back to the time of Sadat, have threatened war over the dam. In fact, not too long ago, the El-Sisi, the president of Egypt, was heard to, I think he was talking to the Chinese foreign minister when he threatened that if Ethiopia takes even one drop of the Egyptian water, what he said was that all options are on the table, and Ethiopians understood that to mean war. But I think that it would be foolish for Egypt to attack Ethiopia over water, because if it did that, personally, I don't think it would succeed. Number one, Ethiopia is not the Ethiopia of 1990. Ethiopia is much stronger now, economically and militarily. Number two, that war would only succeed with the help of Sudan, because it will be very difficult for Egypt to go to war in Egypt, in Ethiopia, without the help of Sudan. Number three, I don't think other African countries will stand by and allow Egypt to do that. And under international law, Egypt would really get in big trouble. It is true that I was at a meeting recently, and somebody was saying, after all, the Russians have attacked Ukraine and they're getting away with it. So Egypt can attack Ethiopia, and nobody would pay any attention to it, and so on and so on. But I think the bigger issue has to do with the fact that any attack on Ethiopia would be designed to destroy the dam. That would be the only reason that I could see Egypt trying to attack Ethiopia, would be to destroy the dam. But you see, if you destroy the dam, you could end up causing more damage to water flows into the Nile, into Egypt, than otherwise. And the reason being that most of the water that flows into the Nile comes from the Ethiopian highlands. And if you destroy that dam, you will cause more harm to both Sudan and Egypt than otherwise. So I think that going forward, intelligent Egyptian leaders should begin to see a way to start talking to Ethiopia. And one thing that I've suggested before is that Egypt is one of the most sophisticated countries in Africa when it comes to water management. It can use that technology and that expertise to help Ethiopia manage water more efficiently. And when it does that, that would increase the amount of water actually flowing to Egypt. And so that kind of cooperation between Egypt and Sudan, which would allow Egyptians to extend their expertise and technology to Ethiopia in water management, can actually help make water use in Ethiopia more efficient and lead to more water flowing to Egypt. So cooperation is the key, and not any type of fighting. And I think that is at this point in time, Egyptians have to understand that they are highly dependent on the Nile. And the only way going forward for them is to cooperate with the main source of the Nile. And that is the several rivers in Ethiopia, including the Atbara, that provide water into the Nile. If I were an Egyptian leader, that is what I would be doing. I would be cultivating better relationship with not just Ethiopian leaders, but ordinary Ethiopians through cultural exchanges, university student exchanges, and so on and so on. Improve my relationship with the Ethiopians so that we can come up with a way to manage water in Ethiopia that will allow more water to flow into Egypt.
Wow, absolutely fascinating and deep insights. Thank you so much, Professor John Mbaku, Distinguished Professor of Economics at Weber State University in Utah and co-author of Governing the Nile Basin, The Search for a New Legal Regime. Thank you so much for your time, Professor. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this important issue.
Hey everybody, please support independent journalism by going to patreon.com/HermelaTV and becoming a member. Thank you so much for your support.